The film opens with Cairo, an 18-year-old girl, sharing her thoughts on adulthood. Living alone in her home while her lawyer parents are frequently away, she expresses her desire for connection and her passion for writing as a means of escape from loneliness. Cairo recounts her encounter with a teacher who is also a writer. As she enters the classroom, she finds Jonathan Miller, the literature instructor, already present, even though the lesson is still an hour away. She mentions her residence in Level Hill, which surprises him, and he hands her a list of books they will study, only to be further impressed when she reveals she has read them all. Shortly after, her friend Winnie arrives, and we discover this is Cairo's second time in the class. When Cairo's stomach growls, she and Winnie step out to grab a bite. Meanwhile, Jonathan examines the books Cairo brought, and his colleague Boris enters, curious about what he's reading. Jonathan is holding an erotic novel, which Boris humorously snatches and begins to read aloud. Afterward, Jonathan heads off to enjoy some biscuits made by Boris, who then points out that Cairo is the only student to have checked out the book Jonathan was looking at. At their home, Beatrice is deeply engrossed in her work while Jonathan attempts to capture her attention. He shares stories about Cairo and the types of books she enjoys, mentioning that she has borrowed his book from the library. However, Beatrice playfully ridicules him. Just then, she receives a call from Amy, prompting Jonathan to step away and play some music as Beatrice becomes frustrated on the phone. They later share a drink, and Jonathan begins to recite lines from a book titled Under the Roofs of Paris. As he leans in to kiss her, they start dancing and getting lost in the moment. Unfortunately, Beatrice's phone interrupts them, and she has to leave. Meanwhile, Boris expresses his dissatisfaction with his weekend while sitting with Jonathan on the court. They glance toward the woods, and Boris suggests that there might be ghosts lurking there, feeding on the souls of the deceased. Suddenly, Cairo emerges from the woods and greets them. They bombard her with questions, and Boris, before leaving, offers her some biscuits while teasing Jonathan. Jonathan inquires if she ever feels scared wandering through the woods alone, to which she confidently replies that she is the scariest thing in there. As Boris heads down the hallway, Winnie playfully stops him to tease him further. He pauses to chat with her as she expresses her desire to join his class and requests his tutoring. From a corner, Cairo observes their exchange. Winnie playfully suggests that she's trying to charm Boris and teases if Cairo feels jealous. The two are at Cairo's house, where Winnie is smoking. She inquires about Cairo's parents, and Cairo admits she's unsure how long they'll be out. Winnie then asks Cairo to help her get dressed, insisting she can be both intelligent and attractive. Cairo is working on an essay for Yale but struggles to answer the prompt about her greatest achievement. Winnie attempts to assist her, but they can't seem to pinpoint the right response. Finally, she advises Cairo to seek out experiences worth writing about. Cairo questions whether Winnie genuinely plans to sleep with Boris, to which Winnie confesses she wants to lose her virginity to an older man. Winnie mentions that Jonathan looks at her differently than the other students, but Cairo is skeptical. During class, Cairo can't help but glance at Jonathan, who later asks to meet her after school. Meanwhile, Boris is in Jonathan's class, inquiring about Beatrice and her writing project. He's invited to dinner, and Jonathan reminds him to shower beforehand. After Boris leaves, Jonathan turns on some music and starts dancing, only to find Cairo giggling behind him. They settle on the couch, and Jonathan asks if she's attended the poetry sessions at Sally Bunny's Victorian Village Salon, encouraging her to go that weekend. He reveals that he wanted to see her because of her story about a reluctant spider, reciting a few lines before they delve deeper into the tale. He then compliments her talent and suggests she take a head start on the midterm, which involves writing a short story inspired by her favorite author. He mentions that this could enhance her portfolio for Yale. Cairo shares with Jonathan that she found his book to be a grand and tragic romantic horror, even quoting some lines from it. He reveals that it was his first piece and admits he hasn't written anything new since getting married and starting his teaching career. Cairo pushes back, suggesting he lacks inspiration. Winnie joins their conversation just as Boris, Jonathan, and Beatrice return, where Winnie served as their waitress. Beatrice inquires about the delay in their order, and Winnie offers them a drink. Tension simmers as Boris and Winnie exchange glances, with Winnie calling Jonathan a dull teacher, prompting laughter from Boris. Jonathan informs Beatrice that she is Cairo's friend, and before they delve into a discussion about her, Beatrice tells Jonathan he excels at teaching rather than writing, implying it's not his calling. They both agree that his lack of writing stems from his choice to teach, which offends Jonathan. On Saturday, Cairo visits the poetry place. Jonathan expressed his hope of finding him there soon. As Jonathan joined her, she inquired if he was familiar with everyone present and whether their activities resembled group therapy. A man named Elliot began to recite a play, captivating the audience. Once the performance concluded, Jonathan and Cairo stepped outside, where he asked her if she anticipated it would be bad. She responded with a laugh, saying yes. Meanwhile, Boris and Jonathan were seated in their usual spot when Cairo arrived with coffee. Boris offered her one of his homemade biscuits, and she playfully suggested he sell them to fundraise for his team, promising to assist him and Jonathan with schoolwork. Jonathan received a text from Beatrice proposing a weekend trip. Cairo and Winnie stopped by Jonathan's class just as he was rushing out. He shared details about the trip with his wife, and Cairo sought his opinion on the writer she selected for her midterm. After a brief conversation, he departed. Winnie then teased Cairo about her interaction with Jonathan while perched on his desk. Boris walked in on their banter and expressed his support for the biscuit baking idea, asking them both to lend a hand. Winnie interrupted, requesting Boris's number to streamline the process, and after getting his phone, she called Cairo. Cairo sat in class, waiting for Jonathan, who walked by her with a chilly greeting. He bluntly informed her that she needed to select a different author for her story, deeming her choice inappropriate. When he pressed her on why she picked that material, she explained that it was about them. She attempted to clarify that the story had its merits, but he insisted she start over with a new author. Frustrated, Cairo demanded he stop treating her like a stranger and to clarify his thoughts. He told her to rewrite the piece, warning that failure to do so would result in a failing grade for the midterm. He expressed his embarrassment and called her childish, to which she retorted that his writing was subpar, labeling him as a nobody, impotent and mediocre, while tears streamed down her face, challenging him to fail her. With a heavy heart, she left, likening her emotional turmoil to a car crash. Back home, she poured herself a drink, tears flowing, with Winnie by her side. Meanwhile, Jonathan returned home and confided in Beatrix about his rough day. She offered him a drink as he recounted his conversation with Cairo regarding her story. Eagerly, Beatrix asked to see the piece, and after reading it, she pressed Jonathan to reveal how Cairo portrayed him in her writing. Seeking a distraction, Cairo turned to Winnie, asking her to text Boris about her drunken state and inquire about his plans. As Jonathan continued to recite lines from Cairo's story, Beatrix took his hand, guiding it to touch her. They paused their kissing when Boris knocked and entered. Winnie confided in Cairo about her desire for Boris to like her and to spend the night with her. Cairo urged her to tell Boris that she was with her and that they were engaging in typical girl activities at night. Beatrix spotted Boris grinning at his phone and inquired about who he was messaging, but he kept it to himself. He was responding to Winnie, telling her to go to bed. Cairo, feeling frustrated, instructed Winnie to remove her shirt since they were about to kiss for Boris. They leaned in close and began to kiss while Cairo snapped a picture, which Winnie sent to Boris. Earlier that day, Cairo had shared her story with the principal. Beatrix received a call from the principal and handed it to Jonathan. Suddenly, Boris decided to leave, bidding farewell to Beatrix. Jonathan discovered that the principal had received the story from Cairo and informed Beatrix, expressing his suspicion that Cairo was behind it. He warned that if she could convince them something inappropriate occurred between them, he might lose his job. Beatrix questioned whether anything had happened between them as teenagers, highlighting the potential danger and whether he was aware of the implications. In the following days, Cairo was absent from school, leaving Winnie feeling downcast. She asked Jonathan if he had seen her, but he coldly replied that he hadn't. Both Cairo and Jonathan were summoned by Principal Joyce for questioning. Cairo explained that he had given her the midterm assignment early and that they often met to discuss literature. She mentioned that he was impressed by her knowledge. Jonathan supported her claim, stating that Cairo was exceptionally talented and that he had mentored her because she surpassed the standard curriculum. Jonathan asserts that he and his teacher share a familiar relationship, typical of a student and educator. He recalls a moment when he returned her phone and mentions a planned vacation with Beatrix. He insists he never crossed any boundaries and pointed out that when she shared a story, he deemed it inappropriate for school. Jonathan acknowledges that he feels powerless to justify his actions. Boris questions Jonathan about his feelings for Cairo, leading to a discussion about his inability to recognize boundaries, which sparks an argument that ends with Boris storming off. Later, Jonathan confides in Beatrix about his suspension, but their conversation quickly turns heated and personal. He accuses Beatrix of being an alcoholic, while she retorts that his dullness drives her to drink. This confrontation is just the start of their conflict. Meanwhile, Winnie confronts Cairo, inquiring about her influence on Jonathan. Cairo reveals that she plans to testify against him before the school board, claiming he underestimated her. In retaliation, Winnie threatens to testify against Cairo, but Cairo counters with blackmail, revealing evidence of her and Boris. She declares this moment as her greatest triumph. The film concludes with Cairo reading her essay about her relationship with Jonathan on her bed, juxtaposed with scenes of Jonathan losing his job, Boris and Winnie passing each other as strangers, and Cairo finding Jonathan at school, where she breaks down in tears upon seeing him. Even though she's hurt, she says that she believes what happened has shaped her into something new. If you enjoyed this video, don't be shy to hit the like button, and if you disliked it, hit the dislike button twice, just to be sure.